The city died in layers. First the power failed, and the towers that had always burned white and gold across the skyline became black teeth against a bruised evening sky. Then the phones stopped connecting. Then the screaming started in neighborhoods too far away to matter, until it wasn't far away anymore. Sil remembered all of it with a cruel, impossible sharpness. The red blink of stalled traffic stretching between shattered high-rises, the oily smell of smoke rolling down avenues built for millions, the sound of glass breaking in bursts as if the whole city had begun to crack from the inside. He had stood on the roof of an office block with a dozen strangers, all of them staring at the wound in the sky. It had not looked real. That was the worst part. The rift hung above the financial district like torn fabric, exposing a deeper darkness behind the world, a jagged seam leaking cold blue light and things that moved wrong inside it. Helicopters had circled it at first. Jets had come after that. He had watched one vanish into the shimmering fracture as if swallowed by deep water, then reappear in pieces that rained fire into the streets below. After that, people stopped pretending this could be explained. The creatures came at dusk. Some flew. Some crawled. Some unfolded from shapes that had been human seconds before. Sil had run because everyone ran. Down emergency stairs thick with bodies, through a lobby ankle-deep in broken marble and blood, out into a street where car alarms wailed to no one. He remembered helping a little girl climb over a flipped taxi. He remembered losing her in the crush. He remembered a shadow crossing over him and every instinct screaming too late. The thing that killed him landed without sound. A pressure hit his back, then a ripping agony so complete it erased the street, the smoke, the people, the world. He slammed face-first into asphalt slick with rain and ash. Something hooked into his ribs and dragged him. He tried to breathe and got blood instead. Around him, the city was ending in sirens and fire and the wet noises of feeding. His last sight was not of the monster. It was of the sky. The rift spread wider above the towers, and the stars behind it went out one by one. Then there was nothing. Sil woke choking on leaves. He lurched upright by reflex and immediately toppled sideways, his body too light, too narrow, too wrong. Dead needles and damp soil pressed against his face. The air was cold enough to sting, filled with the rot-sweet scent of fungi, wet bark, old water, and the copper tang of something freshly torn nearby. For one mad second he thought he had survived, that he was injured in some city park, that if he could just crawl toward a road. His hands struck earth. Not hands. 6 limbs convulsed beneath him, thin and jointed, each ending in black hooked digits that flexed with terrifying unfamiliar precision. He froze. A sound escaped him, high and rasping, nothing like a human voice. His chest fluttered too quickly. His heart, or whatever replaced it, hammered shallow and fast. He twisted and caught sight of himself in a puddle trapped between roots. A tiny creature stared back from trembling water. Velvet black hide drank the little light there was, reducing him to a shape more than a body. His head was too narrow, mouth too wide, lined with glistening needle teeth. Oversized ears rose from his skull like dark petals, twitching independently. His eyes were silver slits, bright and animal, and full of naked panic. He recoiled so violently he rolled onto his back. The forest around him was moonless, but not blind. Shadows had depth now. Cold trunks stood like pillars in layered gradients of gray. Every branch overhead scraped across the darkness with intimate detail. He could hear things he should not have heard, the slow drip of condensation from moss, the scrabble of tiny feet beneath bark, the pulsing wing beat of something passing far above the canopy. The ground itself vibrated with distant movement. A thin shimmer crossed his sight. Evolution system initialized. Unit recognized, shadow-stalker hatchling. Condition, weak. Status, starving. Threat assessment, critical. The words hung in the air without sound, pale and clean and utterly indifferent. No, Sil tried to say. What came out was a dry clicking hiss. He dragged himself backward until his spine, or the small ridged line that replaced it, pressed against a root. Hunger hit him then, sudden and savage, a hollow ache that clenched his whole body. It wasn't the dull human emptiness of a skipped meal. This was a command. Feed. Hide. Live. Another shimmer. Base traits detected. Night adapted vision. Acute hearing. Low mass stealth frame. Warning. Most local lifeforms can kill you. His ears snapped forward before he understood why. From somewhere to his left came a padded tread, too heavy to be a rabbit, too deliberate to be harmless. He held still. Every limb locked. Through ferns silvered by his strange sight, he made out a shape moving between the trees, low shoulders, long muzzle, muscle sliding under coarse fur. Not a wolf exactly. Bigger. Its breath smoked pale in the dark. Its nose lifted, testing. Syl stopped breathing. The creature turned its head toward him. Some instinct deeper than thought flooded his limbs with terrible clarity. Not strength. Never strength. Just direction. The open ground ahead, sparse and easy, suddenly looked like a death sentence. The patch of darkness beneath the tangled roots to his right looked like a mouth waiting to close around him, and yet every nerve in his body yearned for it. Safety would have been the clear path, the visible path, the human path. Syl bared his tiny teeth, trembling so hard the leaves around him shook, and chose the dark. He slid into the knot of roots and wet soil just as the larger beast pushed through the fern bed he had abandoned. Its forepaw came down where his head had been, sinking into leaf rot with a soft, crushing sound. Syl pressed himself flatter by reflex, ribs tightening until even the ache of hunger went still. Dirt clung cold to his belly. A root dug into the softer seam beneath his jaw. Above him the animal's breath rolled past in thick, damp bursts, hot enough to stir the fine membrane along his neck. Its scent was a brutal thing, rank with old blood, wet fur, and the sour musk of a hunter that feared nothing nearby. Syl did not understand how his body made itself smaller, only that it tried. His limbs tucked close. The thin black hide stretched over him seemed to drink the dimness under the roots. The beast's nose probed into the tangle, snorting, huffing, searching. One hooked claw scraped bark inches from his eye. He saw the pale crescent of it with impossible clarity. Saw a bead of mud tremble on the tip. Then something in the darkness around him changed. It was not sight. Not exactly. A coolness spread through the cramped hollow, a felt shape, as if the shadow itself had become water settling into the spaces where light could not reach. Syl sensed its boundaries without touching them. Deepest black pooled beneath the thickest root and behind a slab of stone half swallowed by earth. Those places felt quieter, denser, almost padded. Safe, but only if he matched them. Only if he held still enough to belong there. The beast's sniffing slowed. A pale shimmer flickered across his vision. Skill insight acquired. Shadow sense eye. He had no breath to spare for surprise. He eased one foreclaw half an inch toward that deeper cold pocket and let his body follow. Pain lanced through his shoulder. A twig under his hind leg bit into the joint and nearly made him jerk, but the denser dark wrapped around him like a second skin. The hunter's muzzle lingered. Its nostrils fluttered. Then, with a growl of annoyance, it withdrew. The tread receded one padded step at a time. Syl stayed where he was long after the sounds had faded. His muscles quivered so badly they clicked against the roots. When at last he dragged himself out, the forest seemed changed. Not kinder. Only more legible. Darkness no longer lay across the ground as one endless sheet. It gathered in pockets and seams. Hollows beneath mushrooms. Trenches under fallen bark. Narrow spaces between stones where the cold stayed trapped. He could feel each one brush against his awareness as faint relief against the greater terror of open ground. Hunger returned with teeth. He moved because he had to, belly low, each pause longer than the scuttle before it. A human mind would have looked for berries or water or a path home. That mind was still in him somewhere, recoiling, whispering disgust when he found the first grub by scent and sound beneath a strip of peeling bark. It writhed blind and soft in the splintered wood. Syl struck without thinking, tiny jaws punching through its wet body. Bitter fluid burst over his tongue. The grub bucked once, weakly, then collapsed into meat. He swallowed and almost gagged. The hunger did not care. Warmth spread from his throat into his chest. Not fullness. Barely even relief. But enough to sharpen him. Enough to keep him moving. He learned quickly because the forest punished slowness. Ants stung his muzzle when he snapped too soon. A beetle's shell cracked one of his small teeth and left his jaw throbbing. He lunged after a silver-backed centipede no longer than his paw and took its bite along the inside of his forelimb. Fire raced up the limb. He convulsed in silence under a clump of fungus while the poison burned itself thin. When he could move again, he hunted the centipede down by the dry rasp of its legs and crushed its head first. Another shimmer appeared, brief and mercilessly neat. Stealth action successful. Threat avoided. Minor biomass absorbed. He hated how fiercely he wanted to see more. By the time the dark had shifted from black to charcoal gray between the trunks, Syl had learned one truth the hard way: speed was a lie. Twice he had run. Once from the rush of wings when an owl-like shape dropped soundlessly through the branches, talons spreading wider than his skull. Once from a snake that struck out of a fern bed with a mouth all pink flesh and curved teeth. Both times running had flung him into open patches where every line of his body had screamed exposed. He had lived because he dove into the nearest cool seam of shadow and froze before the follow-up strike came.
He moved where roots made bars of darkness and the shelf fungi cast warped little moons of shade. Each step was measured. Paw down, freeze, breathe through his nose. Listen. The prey scraped fungus from the stem, tiny grunts, wet chewing. A tail twitching against leaves. Syl passed behind a rotten log and eased forward until he could see the tendon working in the creature's neck. He gathered himself. A beetle crackled somewhere behind him. The sound was nothing, a pinprick in the dark, but the prey exploded into motion. It whirled with a shrill spit of alarm and saw him. Its good eye flared. Then it came straight at him. Too fast. Syl jumped sideways, but claws raked across his shoulder, hot and shallow. The impact flipped him into the leaf mold. Needle teeth snapped at his face. He caught a glimpse of the clouded eye, milky and blind, and the other one bright with murder. This thing did not flee. It killed what challenged it. He twisted as the jaws struck. Teeth punched into the loose skin of his neck instead of his throat. Pain burst white through him. Instinct ripped him backward, and a strip of skin tore free in the beast's mouth. Syl vanished under the log, scraping his spine raw on splintered wood, while the larger creature slammed after him and stuck halfway. It shrieked and thrashed, claws gouging furrows, dirt spraying into Syl's eyes. He did not counterattack. He ran deeper into shadow and listened. The animal dragged itself free. Its breathing came fast now, angry, searching. It paced around the log, nails ticking wood, snout snuffling at gaps. Blood dripped warm down Syl's chest. He pressed himself into a pocket of black earth so tight he could feel roots against both flanks. The prey circled once, twice. Then the sounds widened. Not retreat, repositioning, smarter than he wanted. Syl waited until the clearing settled again before he crept the long way around. His shoulder burned. His neck throbbed in pulses that matched his heart. By the time he found sight of it again, the beast had abandoned the fungus and crouched under a low fern shelf, watching the log, watching where he had been. Syl stared at the blind side of its face and understood. It had one bad eye. It listened more than it saw. It charged what it noticed, and it committed hard enough to trap itself in tight spaces. He could not overpower it. He would have to make it spend itself. He began to move, not toward it but around it, keeping low. Deliberately he brushed a twig, then another. The prey lunged at the sound, tearing from cover in a spray of leaves. Syl was already gone, a body length away in another seam of dark. Again he made a faint scrape. Again the beast hurled itself toward it, jaws snapping on emptiness. Its breath roughened. Its motions grew less clean. Foam silvered one corner of its mouth. The third time, Syl led it toward the clearing's edge where the earth dipped around a cluster of stones, and a broken stump leaned like a jagged tooth. He flicked the leaves, then crossed behind the stump and flattened. The beast charged. Its foreclaws hit the slope, soil sheared. Its body lurched sideways and slammed shoulder first into the stump. There was a thick crack, not wood but bone. The creature screamed. Syl was on it before the scream ended. He hit from above, all four limbs clamped to its back, and sank his teeth into the base of its neck where skull met spine. The hide was tougher than fungus flesh, tougher than insects, and for one horrible instant his bite slid. Then panic gave him savagery. He bit again, deeper, tasting hot blood and the salt stink of life forced open. The beast bucked, throwing him against the stones. One claw ripped his belly. He snarled without meaning to, a low tearing sound from some older place than speech, and drove his jaws down until cartilage gave way with a wet crunch. The body convulsed under him, kicked, twitched, then sagged. Syl stayed latched on long after it stopped moving. His chest heaved. Blood ran across his tongue, thick and metallic, and into his throat. Heat spread through him as he tore and swallowed, feeding with trembling urgency while the kill was still warm. Flesh yielded, tendons stretched and snapped. The hunger that had been a knife became a furnace. Light flashed behind his eyes, biomass threshold reached, predatory method recognized. Stealth predation, ambush timing, and darkness affinity confirmed. Available path choices. Burrow Fang Pale Ripper Shade Prowler. The words hung in him more than before, not outside but etched along the inside of his bones. He did not understand how he understood them. Burrow Fang called up clawing, tunnels, blind endurance. Pale Ripper promised speed and frenzy and red-wet violence. Shade Prowler unfurled like cool air under a door, like the instant before a strike from hidden ground. He chose without hesitating. Pain answered at once. It took him from the jaw outward. His spine bowed so hard his claws carved trenches in the dirt. Cold flooded his skin, then a deeper cold, something that reached into marrow and pulled. His limbs lengthened by degrees that felt like dislocation. Muscles cinched tight and rewove themselves around narrower bones. The skin over his shoulders darkened from soot gray to a black that swallowed outline. Membranes, thin as oil on water, stretched between tendon ridges along his flanks and then sank back into the flesh, leaving a strange, slick smoothness that caught no light. His teeth did not grow longer. They grew finer, sharper, meant to enter quietly and hold. When it ended, he lay panting beside what remained of the carcass, smaller nowhere, heavier nowhere, yet more dangerous in every line. The world had changed with him. The shadows under the ferns seemed deeper, more welcoming, as if they recognized a shape kin to their own. Even the clearing felt altered. The night sounds at its edges had not resumed. Insects held back. Something far off in the trees gave a single warning click and then fell silent. Syl lifted his head, blood drying around his mouth, and stared into the dark between the trunks as if the forest had just noticed him back. He stayed still until the ache in his remade bones dulled from white fire to a deep, manageable throb. The carcass beside him had already lost the fierce heat of life. Flies would come soon. Bigger things, too. Syl pushed himself upright on shaking limbs and felt the first true difference in the way his body answered him. He was still small, still low to the ground, but the weight of him had shifted. His feet found silence more easily. His shoulders rolled with a smooth, liquid control that had not been there before, and when he stepped backward into the fern shadow, the dark seemed to take him in rather than merely cover him. He left the clearing without a sound. The forest folded thicker as he went. Roots humped through the earth like the backs of buried beasts, forcing him to weave through narrow spaces where damp soil pressed cool against his belly. Gullies split the ground in crooked lines. their sides slick with moss and old rot. He moved down one by instinct, trusting the trench to hide him, and found the smell of water before he heard it. Cold stone, mud, green things crushed under a patient trickle. The stream bank was shallow, no more than a winding seam of black water under overhanging roots, but it cut clean through the heavy stink of blood on his muzzle. Syl crouched at the edge and drank. The water bit with winter chill. It washed threads of red from his teeth and carried them away in soft ribbons. His reflection quivered on the surface, broken by current and drifting leaves. Two pale eyes stared back from a face too narrow, too angular to be anything human. Black hide blurred into the dark under the bank. When he shifted, he almost vanished from himself. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt horribly natural. A sound made him freeze, not the random scuttle of insects or the cautious tread of grazing things. This was a deliberate scrape, wood against bark, repeated in measured strokes. Syl slid beneath a curtain of hanging roots and peered out. Across the stream, on a rise where the ferns grew sparse, a tree trunk had been scored with long, parallel gashes. Fresh sap shone wet in the wounds. Beneath them lay bones, not scattered, not dropped by chance, but stacked. A rib cage set upright, a jawbone resting across it. Smaller bones spread in a half circle as if pointing outward. Rain and scavengers should have ruined such order. They had not. A warning, a border. The understanding came into him with a coldness deeper than fear. Something lived here that marked and arranged and meant. He backed away one careful step at a time until the tree disappeared behind roots and shadow. The forest no longer seemed empty between hunts. It had intention inside it, hidden in the same dark that sheltered him. As the night thickened, another scent slipped through the wet green air and stopped him in place. Faint. So faint he almost doubted it. Smoke, thin as old memory, not wildfire, not lightning-struck wood. Smoke touched by something harsher, bitter and dry. Metal after a forge, worked iron. It came and went with the shifting breeze, far beyond the stream, beyond the layered trunks. Human, some part of him thought at once, and his whole body went rigid. He did not move toward it. He could not. Fear rooted him harder than any clawed warning tree could have done. But the fact of it remained, sharp as a splinter in the mind. Somewhere in this endless dark, something burned a fire hot enough to bite the wind. He retreated downhill, seeking thickness, and found the ruin by nearly falling into it. One moment the forest floor held under him. The next it broke into a slope of stone choked by ivy and collapsed earth. Syl slid, claws raking for purchase, and landed among blocks shaped too square to be natural. Walls had once stood here. Now only fragments remained, swallowed by roots thicker than a man's torso, split apart by seasons of frost and patient trees. The smell of old dust lingered beneath the moss. He had just enough warning to turn before the attack came. A hiss tore through the dark. Something pale and jointed burst from between two fallen stones, low and fast. It struck where his throat had been a heartbeat earlier, mandibles clacking shut on empty air. Syl sprang sideways and felt one hooked limb rake his flank. Pain flashed hot. He saw it then in a blur of moonless movement. A scavenger thing the size of a large dog, all bone-white plates and too many legs, its eyes tiny black beads sunk into a wedge-shaped skull. It charged again. Syl ran not outward but into the ruin, weaving through broken blocks where the thing's broad shell knocked stone. He heard the scrape of its limbs, the snapping fury of jaws behind him. A gap opened under a slab ahead, barely wide enough for him. He flattened himself and slid into shadow. The creature skidded past, then stopped. Its legs clicked. It tasted the air. Syl pressed into the dark until his breathing nearly ceased. The new slick black of his hide drank what little light remained. The beast turned, uncertain now, mandibles opening and closing with wet little knocks. It edged closer to the crack, too close. He launched from hiding with all the stored force in his narrow body and hit the soft seam beneath its jaw. His fine teeth punched through membrane. Bitter fluid flooded his mouth. The creature convulsed, smashing him sideways into stone hard enough to burst sparks through his skull, but he clung and tore. One claw hooked into the gap between plates. He ripped downward. Flesh parted. The hiss became a shriek that shivered through the ruin, then broke off into a twitching rattle. When it was over, Syl staggered away, one side burning, chest heaving. He fed quickly, sickened by the taste yet unable to waste the meat. The ruin listened in silence. Only when the edge of hunger had withdrawn did he notice the draft. Cool air breathed from behind a curtain of roots at the far end of the collapse. Not the open breath of the forest, but a hidden exhale from underground. Syl limped closer and nosed past the hanging tendrils. The earth there had split around a slab of fallen stone, revealing a narrow fissure slanting down into blackness. The smell that rose from it was old water, mineral damp, and something else beneath both, den musk, ancient and secret. Refuge if he could fit. A lair if something else had claimed it first. Syl lowered himself at the lip of the dark and listened to the hollow breathing below. Then, bleeding and hungry for shelter despite the warning in his bones, he began to climb down. The fissure narrowed almost at once, forcing Syl to descend sideways with his claws dug into damp stone. Cold seeped through his belly and into the bruised ache beneath his ribs. Every stretch pulled at the place along his flank where the plated creature had slammed him into the ruin. He tasted old blood each time he swallowed. Above him, the last gray ribbon of evening shrank behind a net of roots. Below, the dark thickened into something almost grainy, as if it were not merely the absence of light but a substance gathered over years and packed into the earth. Then the crack widened, and he dropped the last body length onto a shelf of rock slick with mineral sweat. He froze there, crouched low, waiting for some hidden thing to rush him. Nothing came. A chamber spread out before him, broader than the ruin above had any right to hide. Water ticked somewhere in the black, soft and patient. Pale fungus clung to the lower walls in torn fans, giving off a corpse-blue sheen that made the shadows between the stone pillars look deeper by contrast. Syl's eyes, made now for dusk and crevice and the underplaces of the world, gathered that weak glow and shaped it into broken lines, heaps, edges. Bones, not monster bones. Human. The smell reached him a breath later, dry leather, rust, old rot soaked into cloth and wood. He crept forward on noiseless feet and found the remains slumped where they had fallen against a wall worked by hands, not nature. The skeleton wore fragments of hardened hide and corroded rings of metal. A spear shaft had snapped beneath the ribs. Nearby lay another body sprawled face down in a wash of gravel, one arm still thrust toward the tunnel as if trying to crawl free. A knife gleamed in the muck beside it, its edge blackened but intact. Hunters. A memory stirred with ugly sharpness. Sunlight on steel, running feet, men shouting through trees, the certainty of being pursued. It did not come whole. It came as pain first, then fear, then the ragged shape of understanding. Humans came into places like this with blades and fire. Humans died here too. Behind the bones, the wall bore carvings half swallowed by calcified drips. Syl edged closer until his nose nearly brushed the stone. Figures had been cut in a ring around a central shape too, eroded to read clearly. Some were beasts he almost recognized from instinct alone. Horned things, scaled things, fanged things with too many joints. They were shown changing. Smaller forms opened like wounds into larger ones. Limbs lengthened. Jaws split. Spines rose. At the center, buried under white mineral crust, a final figure stood upright and wrong, crowned in branching darkness. The space behind his eyes tightened. A pressure, delicate as a needle, slid through his skull. Not a voice. Not thought exactly. A pattern waking because it had found a shape in the world to answer. Threshold nearing. Pathways responsive. Dormant branch detected. True evolution potential. Insufficient biomass. Insufficient catalyst. Choice pressure increasing. Syl jerked back, claws scraping stone. The sensation vanished, leaving only the wet tick of water and the pounding of his heart. Yet the words, if they were words, remained etched inside him with the force of hunger. He looked from the carved wall to the human dead, to the shadowed mouths of deeper tunnels beyond the chamber. Hide. Heal. Let the ache settle and the danger pass. Or hunt once more while he was hurt and trembling, because whatever had stirred inside him would not wait forever. The decision hardened in him with the same cold certainty that had once made him spring for the seam beneath the plated beast's jaw. He took the knife first, testing it with a careful paw. Too heavy to wield, but its edge could cut. He dragged it into a darker patch near the mouth of a side tunnel, where the stink of old burrowed musk seeped out in fresh threads. Then he crouched above the trail and became stillness. Time blurred into pain and patience. At last something came, shuffling and snorting, blind pale and low to the ground. A burrow lizard, thick-bodied, with a frill of fleshy feelers around its mouth and forelimbs built like digging hooks. It nudged forward, following the scent of blood from the carcass scraps still caught in Syl's claws. It was larger than him, stronger. Its hide looked rubbery and hard to pierce anywhere but the throat. Syl waited until the thing nosed under him. He dropped. The knife edge, driven by his full weight, punched through the softer fold where neck met shoulder. The lizard exploded into motion. Stone battered Syl from all sides as it rolled, shrieking in wet grunts. One hooked forelimb raked his hind leg open to the bone-bright sting beneath skin. He nearly lost the knife, nearly lost his grip. Then instinct surged hotter than pain. He twisted deeper into the wound and tore with teeth and claw together, ripping the channel wide. Hot blood flooded over his muzzle. The lizard convulsed, bucked once and sagged. Syl fed where it fell, gulping until the chamber tilted around him. Flesh vanished into him like fuel cast onto hidden fire. Heat blazed through every tendon. His spine locked. A sound crawled out of him that was not human, and not anything he had yet been. A raw tearing cry as his body arched against the stone. Bones clicked and slid beneath his skin. His forelimbs lengthened, shoulders rolling wider while the rest of him stayed lean. Black hide tightened and drank the blue fungus light until he looked cut from deeper night. Fine climbing claws curved longer, harder, wickedly precise. Along his back, a ridge of low sensory filaments pushed through the skin like wet thorns, tasting every shift of air. His jaw ached, split, settled stronger. When he opened his mouth, the teeth inside were no longer the tiny, desperate needles of a scavenger. They were narrow knives meant to slip between bone and armor and find what pulsed beneath. He staggered upright on a frame still small, still built for concealment but no longer frail. The chamber had changed with him. No, that was wrong. He had changed enough to read it differently. He could hear movement now in the deeper dark, far beyond the human dead and the carved wall. Slow movement, deliberate, not the rustle of vermin, not the scrape of some blind tunnel beast. A pause followed, heavy as held breath. Something down there had felt his birth. Then, from the black throat of the earth, two dim amber eyes opened and fixed on him.
Syl took the step anyway. The crystal shard touched his foreclaw. Agony and cold detonated together. Light without light flooded the chamber, and the system's voice, silent, immaculate, vast, opened inside every nerve he possessed. True evolution condition discovered. Then the amber eyes narrowed. And the dark moved first.